Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Hello. Yesterday, our country celebrated the National Unity Day. This holiday is not only a tribute to an important historical event and its heroes. It symbolizes the unity of our multinational people, its consolidation around common values. At the same time, one of such key, fundamental values was and remains the Russian language. Support of Russian as the state language of the Russian Federation and the languages of the peoples of Russia is among our key priorities. Today, we will discuss what this support should be, taking into account the dynamic changes both in the country and in the world. What else needs to be done to preserve and ensure the development of the languages of all the peoples of the country, and our common, native Russian language for every citizen of Russia? With all the unique ethno-cultural and religious diversity of our country, it is the Russian language that largely determines our spiritual and national identity. I believe that this is what should be taken into account when forming general education programs in such academic subjects as the Russian language and the language of the people, the state language of the Republic of the Russian Federation. I agree with the experts who propose to create unified state textbooks on these subjects. Their content should be balanced and interrelated. It is necessary to take into account the peculiarities of perception, thinking of today's youth, and, of course, the capabilities of the State Information System National Dictionary Fund. It will start working from the next 2025 year. The decision to create this highly demanded database is dictated by the need to form an official source of knowledge about the canonical norms and rules of the modern Russian literary language. Such a public resource, as well as dictionaries in general, is also needed by those who are connected with the word in their professional and social activities. To teachers, students, school children, and representatives of state power, by our legislator at all levels. Another important topic of teaching Russian language and literature in Donbass and Novorossiya. I am glad to welcome creative figures and teachers from our historical regions to the new composition of the Council. Now many socially significant facilities, including educational institutions, are being actively built and modernized there. I believe that Russian literature classrooms should be equipped with everything necessary as a priority. I draw the attention of the Ministry of Education, authorities of all levels, public organizations, our enterprises and companies, that help with the arrangement of schools to this. In addition, it would be right to create centers for popularization of the Russian language and the works of our famous writers, on the basis of public libraries of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, the Kherson region, and Zaporozhye. At the same time, we understand that the knowledge of language, the education of the culture of speech, begins from preschool age, at home, in the family. And a children's book plays a huge role here. Its importance for the full development of personality is simply invaluable. Respect for the book, the desire from an early age to introduce the child to reading in our traditions. Let's think together about how to help parents, grandparents, and grandfathers fill their home libraries with kind, intelligent, and well-published children's literature. I would also like to know your opinion on what additional support is needed for state children's libraries. Such libraries are a unique asset of Russia. I ask the heads of the regions to actively help libraries with replenishing funds, repairing and equipping, and expanding areas. I have said more than once that our task is to create on the basis of such libraries real centers of education, upbringing, cultural and social life, primarily in rural areas and in small towns. School libraries also require special attention. I am sure their place in the modern education system can be much more significant. They should become points of attraction for children, a space of knowledge, and teachers, librarians, authoritative, knowledgeable mentors, who actively participate in the educational process. They can conduct additional education programs, become organizers of events related to current events and memorable dates, such as, for example, the anniversary of Alexander Pushkin, the creator of the Russian literary language, and the foundations of modern speech. This year, on the occasion of the 225th anniversary of the birth of the great poet, many bright forums, actions, programs were held. I am convinced that projects dedicated to the creative work of the geniuses of Russian literature should be carried out on an ongoing basis and become an integral part of the cultural life of society. So, even in the recent past, reading programs were popular, in demand. When famous actors and professional readers performed literary repertoire at patron concerts or visiting lecture halls. It is necessary to return this practice, first of all in schools and colleges, so that children know the reference sound of their native speech, absorb the beauty and imaginative richness of their native language from a young age. I am sure that the renewed Knowledge Society will be ready to work on these programs. They use their increased capabilities for this. At the same time, I note that not only literary classics are important for the upbringing of the younger generation, but even today many works are being created that combine high artistic value and a civic position. It is necessary to support talented authors who, in their work, turn to the events of our time and to its true heroes. It is necessary to help their works find their readers, both at home and abroad, including using the capabilities of Russian cultural and educational centers that are open in many countries of the world. I would ask the members of our Council, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to analyze the activities of these organizations and help build their work more systematically, qualitatively, taking into account Russia's long-term interests. Our plans to expand international cooperation with the countries of the world majority. I would like to add that we also need to work actively with civil societies, writers, cultural figures, including those states, including Europe, whose ruling elites pursue an open anti-Russian policy. This does not negate our good relations with the people who live in these countries. I know that there is an idea to establish a special scholarship for young gifted Russianists, citizens of other countries, who teach Russian language and literature, promote our culture abroad. They often work in very difficult conditions. This is a good idea. I fully support it and propose to assign the scholarship to the name of the outstanding philologist and linguist Professor Verbitskaya. A wonderful teacher, scientist, a real ascetic, Lyudmila Alexeyevna, was one of the initiators of the creation of the Russian Language Council. The successor of this structure is our newly formed Council for the Implementation of State Policy in the field of support of the Russian language and the languages of the peoples of Russia. It is intended to become the main coordinator of interdepartmental cooperation in this area, as well as in solving the tasks of strengthening the position of the Russian language in the world, to provide all possible conditions for those who want to get to know our country better, to learn our language. And here I would like to address the Ministry of Education and Science. To enter Russian educational institutions, foreign applicants are tested in the Russian language so that they, like Russian citizens, can apply to several universities at once. These tests must have a single standard common to all universities in the country. I ask you to solve this problem. General rules regarding knowledge of the Russian language are also needed for those who come to Russia to work. It is necessary to determine and consolidate the level of language proficiency, taking into account the real needs for employment. When communicating in everyday life, taking into account the professional requirements of our social and cultural norms of behavior, including developing a unified federal algorithm for working with children of newcomers who do not speak or have a weak command of the Russian language. I ask my colleagues to submit an appropriate proposal. And in conclusion, about the legal regulation in the field of language policy. The law on the languages of the peoples of Russia and the Russian Federation was adopted back in 1991, and obviously needs significant revision, starting from the creation of an official register of these languages, to bringing the law into strict compliance with modern realities and current legislation. Support of the Russian language and its promotion in the world, preservation of the languages of all the peoples of Russia, play a primary role for our multinational country and should have appropriate support, legal resource, and, of course, meaningful semantic. I ask the presidential administration and the council to formulate the basic strategic goals and directions of this most important area, and to prepare a draft policy framework, state policy in this area. Let's get to work. A word to Elena Alexandrovna Yapolskaya. Please, Elena Alexandrovna. Thank you, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. Dear colleagues, first of all, let me sincerely thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to share your proposals in the field of support and promotion of the Russian language, the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation. The Council for the Implementation of State Policy in this area was formed by your decree on the 22nd of August this year. Over the past months, we have tried to carry out such intensive work with our colleagues in order to deal with specific cases as quickly as possible. Thank you for expanding the powers of the Council. We understand our responsibility. It is especially important that the Council's responsibility now includes support not only for the Russian language, but also for other languages of our multinational country. The tasks you have set for creating a unified register of such languages and improving legislation in our field will certainly become one of the priorities of the Council's activities. In Russia, where original cultures have never been tried to be melted down in a certain cauldron, where the uniqueness of each people was sincerely appreciated, it is historically accepted to treat national languages as sincerely yours. We firmly know that every language is priceless, and at the same time, Russian is the native language for all citizens of Russia. As you have repeatedly stressed, Vladimir Vladimirovich, there is no substitute for the Russian language. It is the natural spiritual framework of our entire multinational country. Indeed, if national languages help to preserve the ethnos, then Russian unites ethnic groups into a single people, diverse in blood, but indivisible in spirit. Russian was and remains the language spoken by the soul of our people. It is not for nothing that the Russian language is both a means and a goal. The means of communication, as it should be a language, and the goal for which our people have shed blood for centuries. It is really very important that our colleagues from Donbass and Novorossiya are with us today. Every 10th member of our council represents the regions reunited with Russia. We will learn from them the love of the Russian language and the courage to defend it. More than 3 million Russian schoolchildren are currently studying the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation in the classroom. In my opinion, it's just doubling happiness when you have two native languages. And Russian today, as in the historical perspective, remains a macro-mediator, ensuring the unity, harmony, and development of the country. We warmly welcome, Mr. President, your suggestion not to contrast, even formally, the concept of Russian and native in the school curriculum. Russia equals motherland, Russian equals native. At the same time, the existing textbooks on the subject of native Russian contain many fascinating facts about the origin and formation, transformations of the language. A lively interest, he is like a magnet to which knowledge itself is attracted. And, in my opinion, this information should become part of the unified state line of textbooks on the Russian language. Russian literature course, that is, in the relationship of the Russian language and literature, is the creation of such a line. And within the framework of the entire course of Russian literature, as you rightly noted, the task is overdue. We are ready to participate in the implementation. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, for your words about children's books. The future reader, it does not begin with the learned alphabet. It begins with fairy tales that your mother or grandmother reads to you, with an illustration that you look at from behind dad's shoulder. Such a moment is priceless. It is forever remembered that literature. This is a magical world where the closest people have led you by the hand. Children's books are not just about reading. First of all, it's about the family. That's why they are so important. Live, my lords, Russian people, in harmony with your old fairy tale. A wonderful thing. An old fairy tale, woe to the one who will not have it in his old age, said our classic Nikolai Semyonovich Leskov. I am sure that today the topic of children's books, its quality and accessibility, will definitely be raised by colleagues, as well as the development of specialized children's libraries, school libraries, as well as the revival of reading programs in full, as you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, have already said. This practice is not difficult organizationally, but it is very effective and gives a lot to the guys. We remember this from our school childhood. In addition, as you rightly noted, there are children with foreign citizenship, or already citizens of the Russian Federation, who have a poor command of the Russian language. This has a negative impact on their level of mastering the school curriculum and, which is completely unacceptable, on the academic performance of their classmates. I absolutely agree with your suggestion that it is necessary to work with such children according to a single federal algorithm. Let me assume that such an algorithm should include a mandatory diagnosis of language proficiency and, based on its results, support for a particular child until he or she masters Russian to the extent necessary for mastering the school curriculum. As far as I know, the Ministry of Education of the Russian Federation is ready to develop a system of such support. I think it would be good if it covered all stages of general education, including preschool. The sooner we start working with a child, the fewer problems we will have with his adaptation and socialization later. I can't help but touch on another important topic, the dominance of Anglicism, transliteration, and Latin around us. Among the tasks of protecting and supporting the Russian language as the state language, you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, have directly identified, countering the excessive use of foreign vocabulary. The cleansing of our language of excessive borrowings is not the first time. Similar sanitary procedures have been repeated regularly in history, and a similar moment is coming again. This is not about prohibition, not about the dense protection, from which you warned us. And, of course, it would never occur to anyone to abolish foreign languages or ban classical European culture, it seems to me. That Russia in general is now its only worthy heir. This is not about banning a foreign language, and this is about returning the native language to the place that it rightfully should occupy. Down with the coverking of the language gave this rampant romanization of our environment. While working in the State Duma, but also with colleagues, a corresponding bill was developed. It has not yet been submitted for consideration. I hope it happens one day. However, a regulatory solution is still not enough here. We need to make Russian in a good sense fashionable among young people. Approach this task with imagination, without boredom. For example, it seems to me it makes sense to think about such a youth game, say in Russian, who can express themselves more accurately in their native language, who will find more synonyms when a person realizes that for some slang, there, chill, flex, sorry, krenzovi. Russian has dozens of designations, a lot of figurative and semantic nuances that Russian, speaking in a youth-like way, is inexpressibly cool. Maybe this will be the beginning of that very interest in the native language. From interest to love, especially among the young, as is known, one step. In general, it is important to take care of what our children love, because a person carries this love later through life. Speech, holidays, music, images, heroes. That is why, in accordance with your instructions, Vladimir Vladimirovich, together with the movement of the First and the Society of Knowledge, we are preparing to announce an all-Russian competition of creators-manufacturers of domestic toy games, called Native Toy. The competition will start in the near future. It will be divided into several stages. We hope to attract all concerned and creative citizens of the country, who have an idea of toys based on our ethical and aesthetic traditions. Then, with the help of experts, the parents of children will select the most original ones. And it is necessary to bring the best models to production. A toy is a serious matter. And I am sure that, by the way, we will receive a lot of ideas for games and toys related to the Russian language. Moreover, let me add that ordinary designers today design a lot of interesting art objects based on the Cyrillic alphabet. In this way, it is possible to fit the symbols of the native language into the public space. Creatively approach the design of our cities and towns, forming a nationally oriented environment. We also propose to support this direction. Knowing that colleagues will raise today the most important topic of promoting the Russian language abroad, systematization, and improving the effectiveness of this work, as you have just said. Russian is becoming the language of a spiritually healthy world, an expression of those human, family, moral values that do not need translation. Russian today is the language of preserving the human in man. Here you are, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, separately focused on the events dedicated to the anniversary of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. The neo-Nazis, with whom Russia is fighting today, are tormented by fierce hatred for the three main spiritual opponents: orthodoxy, victory, and the great Russian culture, with its peak in the person of Pushkin. That's what they are afraid of, like devils of incense. But as soon as our land is cleared, and the bells are ringing again, the eternal flame is lit, monuments are being restored. The great Russian word sounds, and will sound forever and ever, which, I hope, will be served by the foundations of the state language policy, for the development of which we will immediately undertake with joy, and with great gratitude for such an assignment. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, Konstantin Sergeyevich Derevyanko. Thank you, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. Dear members of the Council. Good afternoon. What does it mean to be literate in the 21st century? At the beginning of the last century, an unprecedented literacy program assumed the need to teach people to read, write, and count. Now this concept has become much broader. Today, being literate means being communicatively competent, understanding texts of different levels of complexity, analyzing and interpreting information, formulating your thoughts in a clear language, both in writing and orally. And in the age of information technology, these skills are becoming a critically important and necessary condition for the formation of a harmonious personality, as well as the key to realizing the human potential of the country. At the same time, it's no secret that today there is a tendency to decrease the level of speech culture of the younger generation. This becomes a tangible obstacle both at the stage of education and in further professional implementation. For example, school children today have difficulty solving text problems in mathematics and history because they cannot understand the meaning of what is written. Often they cannot explain a natural scientific phenomenon in their own words in biology and geography lessons. Of course, there are objective reasons for this, including those related to the development of social networks, with an increase in the amount of low-quality media content on the network. But I would like to focus on a solution that, in my opinion, is effective in overcoming these problems. First of all, not only in Russian lessons, but in classes in all school subjects, it is necessary to introduce work on the development of speech culture. It should be based on the systematic, step-by-step formation of children's vocabulary, the conceptual apparatus necessary for mastering the entire school curriculum, as well as for understanding the texts of literary works, especially our classics. It is very important that children, reading, for example, Pushkin, and he began to click a goldfish, understand the native Russian meaning of the word click, call, and not just click on the screen with the mouse. The dictionary is undoubtedly the main tool for the development of speech culture. Today, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, in accordance with your instructions, a lot of work has been done in this direction. The federal law on the state language has been significantly updated. The list of its areas of application has been expanded, including the field of education. As you said in your speech, by the end of the 25th year, a unique state information system, the National Dictionary Fund, will be launched, under the auspices of the Government Commission on the Russian Language, which is headed by the Minister of Education Sergei Sergeyevich Kravtsov. The requirements for the compilation of normative dictionaries have been developed and approved, according to which the first four are almost ready: an orthographic, orthopic, dictionary of foreign words, and explanatory. These resources will be very useful to specialists in various fields, including our teachers. However, for the formation of vocabulary and speech development of school children, starting from the very first grade, specialized educational dictionaries adapted to the age of students are needed. Such dictionaries should be unified, contain the vocabulary of all subject areas and literary works, have no contradictions in the interpretation of our values, and reflect the cultural code of the country. It is the printed forms of dictionaries that are important for primary and secondary schools, since with their help the child learns the structure and system of the language, learns the skill of searching for information, sees the word in the system, and not only in the form of fragmentary output of the result. Russian dictionaries in this regard, I propose to approve a line of modern unified dictionaries of the Russian language, include them along with textbooks in the educational process at all levels, and make them mandatory for use in Russian language lessons and other subjects. It is also necessary to provide appropriate resource support for the classrooms of Russian schools. This issue has already been worked out in principle with the Ministry of Education. Therefore, I ask you, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, to support our initiative. To date, we have accumulated a huge potential in this area. Based on current academic research, using the most advanced data analysis technologies, we will create the world's leading educational vocabulary complex, which will contribute to improving the quality of our children's results and provide a unified language environment for Russian education. Russian, in turn, allow me to support the idea that you have expressed, Mr. President, about the need to create a line of modern unified state textbooks on the Russian language, starting from the first grade. This is a very important and timely task. School children should see in the textbook an exemplary Russian language, literate, understandable, accessible text for the child. The language of the textbook, and not only in any Russian language, should also reflect the key ideas of the strategic goals of the state. These requirements are not always fulfilled now. For example, more than 50% of the texts of exercises in textbooks, which are now included in the federal list of Russian language for primary school, are devoted to nature. But topics related to science and technology are represented in the texts in less than 1%. Textbooks should also reflect traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. We also have something to work on in this matter. For example, in modern textbooks on the Russian language, the word forest occurs almost 10 times more often than the word family. And in elementary school textbooks in all subjects, the phrase strong family does not occur once. In this regard, I consider it important to take these factors into account when developing the examination of textbooks. And after the approval of unified educational dictionaries, we will have objective criteria and bases for such linguistic analysis. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Please, Lyudmila Gennadievna Gontareva, yes. Lugansk.
Hello, I represent the Luhansk People's Republic. Russian. At the beginning of my speech, I would like to express my gratitude for the fact that today we have the opportunity to speak Russian fluently, study it to the fullest, and read the works of Russian classics in the original language. We have been going to this for a very long time, remembering the years when our territories were part of Ukraine, and all teaching was conducted in the Ukrainian language, despite the fact that the Luhansk region is predominantly Russian-speaking. Since the beginning of the 1990s, the number of hours for learning Russian has been limited, 1 or 2 lessons of Russian a week in each class, and the subject of literature did not exist. There was foreign literature, and we had to study the works of Pushkin, Lermontov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, in Ukrainian translations, which did not convey the true syllable of the Russian author, but, frankly speaking, distorted it. I want to note that since the summer of the 22nd year, teachers of the Russian language and literature of the Luhansk People's Republic have had the opportunity to take courses on studying and implementing into the work of the state educational institutions. Teachers were warmly welcomed in the cities of Rostov-on-Don, Pyatigorsk, where leading specialists of the Academy of the Ministry of Education, teachers of universities and schools of the Russian Federation, shared their work experience with us and taught us a new format of final exams. Many thanks to the Academy of the Ministry of Education of the Russian Federation for organizing this interaction. And already today, our students are active participants in the Olympiad in Russian language and literature on the Sirius platform, participants in creative contests of total dictation. Since 2022 year, large cities of Russia have taken patronage over each city of the LPR. For example, Krasnodon has a chef's region of the Tumen region. Lugansk has Moscow. Thanks to the patrons' help, the library fund has been updated. Also, on your separate instruction, at the beginning of the 23rd and 24th academic year, all our school libraries received a wonderful gift: fiction, 5 copies of books, 300 titles, classics, poetry, works by foreign authors, 4 different age categories. Thank you so much for this gift. After all, since 1991, there have been no receipts of such literature in our library. Today, the federal project of the Face of Friendship is being successfully implemented on the territory of our republic, where, within the framework of agreements concluded with the twin schools of the Russian Federation, children have the opportunity to communicate in their native Russian with their peers, participate in various joint creative programs, promotions, pedagogical and parent forums, teleconferences, poetry contests, and receive a lot of interesting information. Major repairs are being carried out in the schools of the Republic. They are equipped with modern computer equipment, didactic and methodological materials. New sports grounds are being built. What else is required? Tables for learning the rules of the Russian language, portraits, visual aids, multimedia projectors, and whiteboards, printers to print handouts. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, for making the equipment of the Russian language literature classrooms a priority. School textbooks are a difficult point to discuss. Our educational institutions are provided with educational literature 100%. But the funds need to be updated. At the moment, educational organizations have received history textbooks for the 10th, 11th grades as part of the unified textbook program, which significantly improves the quality of preparation for lessons. And now, we are looking forward to the release of state textbooks on the Russian language and literature. This will be a landmark event for us. Separately, I would like to say that the population of the Luhansk People's Republic is heterogeneous. In addition to the fact that it has always been multinational, not all localities speak Russian. To a greater extent, this applies to the territories that returned to the LPR after the 22nd year. For example, this is in the Belokurikinsky, Milovsky, Starobilsk districts, where people historically spoke Surzic. Since 2014 year, the Russian language has been completely removed from the school curriculum there, and until the 2022 year, children did not have the opportunity to study it. What is happening there now? Ukrainian language teachers have been retrained. This is 500 hours of mastering the methodology of teaching the Russian language. Russian. It turns out that these teachers themselves are now learning the correct command of the norms of the Russian language. And many school children have begun to learn Russian, some from the first, some from the fifth, and some from the 10th grade. Perhaps it makes sense to organize cultural centers with the conditional name of speaking in Russian in these territories at libraries, clubs, where concerts, meetings with writers of the Readers' Competition would be held. Being a part of Greater Russia today, and being in a single educational space, our children are finally learning Russian language and literature in sufficient volume, although I would like to have additional hours of Russian in the senior, 9th, and 11th grades, which are so necessary for our students in preparation for the OJ and the Unified State Exam, also taking into account the peculiarities of the new regions. I would like to make proposals on expanding the topics of extracurricular activities that will contribute to a deeper study of the Russian language, and a little bit about the literature program. The events taking place today are reflected in the works of modern writers. I would like a poem and prose about the events in the Donbass, about the defenders and heroes of SPO, to be in the school literature curriculum. Of course, this should be a very serious selection. Strong, competent texts are needed, taking into account the age of the reader and the educational impact on him. This is a difficult, painstaking work, but it is very important. First of all, to foster a sense of patriotism among the younger generation. As a resident of Krasnodon, I also want to thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, for the fact that the novel about the exploits of our young guys from the Young Guard organization, Roman Fadiev, was included in the school literature curriculum. It is a great pride and joy for us. In continuation of the topic, I want to share my work in order to preserve the memory of the hero's countrymen. For more than 2 years, the Young Guard in the ranks also selected works for the collection, solving this task both as a teacher and as a writer. There are works that have long been known to the reader, and those that express a modern view of the activities of underground workers, and unique materials that have practically never been published anywhere. The book Eyewitnesses and Participants, the compiler of which I am also, presents works about the events in the Donbass. Since 2000 of the 14th year, both of these books are in all school libraries of the city of Krasnodon and the Krasnodon district, and they are in great demand. Teachers and students need such literature. I often hear words of gratitude from our teachers for these collections. This confirms my idea that similar works must necessarily be in the school curriculum. Russian teachers of the Luhansk People's Republic love their subject very much, are proud of it, and do everything possible to make Russian speech pure, multifaceted, deep, imaginative, and we pass on our knowledge to children with love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lyudmila Gennady, you have just told us about what happened to the Russian language in previous years and even in the previous few decades. I would like to remind you that after the formation of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party began to pursue a policy of so-called Koreanization, as you probably know very well. Russian was directly forcibly forced to study in the Donetsk and Luhansk agglomeration. People who had never spoken Ukrainian and considered Russian as their native language were forced to study the Ukrainian language.
Людей, которые на украинском никогда не говорили и считали своим родным языком русский язык.
Ukrainian is, as far as I understand, a very related language to the Russian language. And, in my opinion, it has its own charm and beauty, just like the whole Ukrainian culture. But this policy of the organization, it was carried out quite aggressively, persistently, just really forced people to learn Ukrainian. People who considered Russian their native language. Now that more attention is being paid to the Russian language, let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. Our policy in the field of the Russian language should be soft, natural, based on the needs of life. And I am sure that life will melt into its place, and our task is to create the necessary conditions for people to learn Russian. Life as part of a single state, as part of the Russian Federation, it, one way or another, I repeat, everything, will melt into its place. It is a natural need for a person living in the Russian Federation to learn and love the state-forming language. This goes without saying. And, of course, relying on such dedicated people as you, we are sure we will achieve the desired result. Thank you very much. Please, Natalia Nikolaevna Karpovich.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, dear members of the Council, thank you so much that today there is an opportunity to talk about the most important thing for us, for families. It's about family reading. What you have already said in your speech, Vladimir Vladimirovich, underlines the importance of the fact that it is family reading, and, of course, a paper book that is of great importance for us, for families with children. The preservation of the Russian language is the preservation of our national wealth, and, of course, we are starting to teach children the Russian word in the family, and it is very important for us that the key role of the Russian word is both our speech and thinking. This is our future generation. This is our investment in our future. And in the era of digital technology today, a lot of attention is paid to the figure, and the paper book has gone by the wayside. Although it is absolutely, probably, such a devaluation is unnecessary. We need to rethink this, because it is physical contact with the book that makes it possible. And here, not only as a parent of mothers of 7 children of different ages, who go to school, to institutes, I will talk about my own experience too. Here, both experts and educational psychologists emphasize that it is a paper book that allows a child to develop very much not only attention, imagination, memory, not only to immerse himself in the world of fairy tales and become creative, to immerse himself in experiences, and there is also the ability to develop cognitive skills, fine motor skills, that is, everything that we need for the development of a child. You know, in your speech at the meeting with the laureates of the all-Russian competitions in the field of education, you said very important and necessary words. If I may, I'll read them out. It is necessary to instill skills and a love of reading to discuss this literature. You need to feel the taste of the book. The taste at holding it in your hands is not just getting information, but absorbing into those intonations everything that the writer feels. And you know, today, I want to thank the teachers where my children study. Today, when they give a task to children to learn a poem or a story, they ask them to bring a paper book that they used to read, study, show, and tell about it. And it seems to me that this is a very important experience that our children need today, because it is by using this book that they form a careful attitude to it, a love of language, and an understanding of those authors who write for them. I also want to draw attention to the fact that a paper book is not just a medium of information. It is an art object that can be passed down from generation to generation. Here I have a large library that my parents have collected. You know Vladimir Vladimirovich, that at that time we were handing over waste paper to buy some unique books. These books are kept by me. I use this library, and today my children have the opportunity to use at any time the necessary important information that is stored at home, thanks to my parents. And this is an inheritance. This is the value, the tradition that is passed down from generation to generation, not only in my family, but this is the cultural code of our large families. It's a value. And you know, I really want to ask you, specifically speaking about today's opportunities for every family, for every child, to develop a social program to support children and children from 3 to 6 years old, so that every family can purchase very high-quality good books for their children. We need such a social support program so that we form our family libraries, which are available at any time. And the second question that I really want to raise too is, of course, the lessons of talking about important things at school. They really bring our children closer and contribute to the fact that they learn more, discuss. I would just like to offer 2 lead new topics that would allow us to emphasize the full significance of the great dates of our poets, writers, the heritage that we have of Russian, and such dates as, for example, holidays of Slavic writing, culture, and other holidays which are necessary for us to restore all the cultural heritage that exists, which has gone a little aside during this time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that family libraries and family reading will do their part in our education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with you. A book is, of course, a work of art. Everything is important here, everything is absolutely. And the cover and fonts and so-called pictures, illustrations, they also create images. This includes a preface, an afterword, and historical references. It's just, of course, a work of art. I repeat again, you are absolutely right. And we will try to follow your recommendations. Please, Ziganshin Kamil Farshevich. Vladimir Vladimirovich, thank you very much for responding and drawing attention to the need to support and protect the languages of the peoples of Russia. Since this topic is quite serious and extensive, I ask you to forgive me if I exceed the advertising a little. Although Bashkiria has a good saying, I will probably break it. The lariat should be long and the tongue short. Our council was formed in order to improve the preservation, development, and support of not only the Russian language, but also the languages of the peoples of Russia. The law on the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation was adopted back in 1991 year. More than 30 years have passed, and many of its provisions have lost their relevance. The need for its adjustment was also discussed at a meeting of the Council of the President of the Russian Federation in the 2019 year, but this was not included in the list of instructions at that time. It seems to me that it is important to ensure a legislative and regulatory definition of the languages of the peoples of Russia. In particular, to systematize the status of the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation, and to determine a set of effective measures for their protection and support. Now, in accordance with the text of the law of the 91st year, such concepts as the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation are not differentiated into native languages from among the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation, the languages of official communication of the population in places of its compact residence, and so on. And as a representative of the National Republic, I would propose to legally distinguish and define the following legal concepts. The first one is the state language of the Russian Federation. At the same time, having determined that Russian is the state language of the Russian Federation, and the native language for all citizens of our country. Second, the languages of the republics of the Russian Federation are the national state languages of the republics within the Russian Federation. The third is the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation. At the same time, there should be no legal uncertainty regarding one or another language to the languages of the peoples of Russia, by which I mean the indigenous languages. That is, the languages of the peoples who historically live on the territory within the current borders of the Russian Federation. Now there is no single entry of the languages of the peoples of our country, but it is needed in the form of a single state register or list. This will help to build a system of their protection and support. It is obvious that the law of the 91st year needs to be changed. It should correspond to the time. We need a new up-to-date law on the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation, as part of the unified system of the state language policy of Russia, with the introduction of real control over its strict implementation. The Russian language unites all the peoples of Russia and is the basis of national identity. These are your words, Vladimir Vladimirovich, and that's all said. You said that 4 years ago, not so long ago. In addition, in the 25th year in Russia, as already mentioned, the National Dictionary Fund will finally appear. The Federal State Information System, which includes information about the norms of the modern Russian literary language. I propose to supplement it with a separate section with information about the norms of the languages of the peoples of Russia, recorded in the relevant normative dictionaries. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, in one of your speeches, you very clearly noted that the preservation of the Russian language, literature and culture, the languages of the peoples of our great country, are issues of national security. The preservation of national identity in the global world. You also stressed that concrete steps are needed to preserve and develop languages, to return interest in reading, and, of course, to deepen the humanitarian component in education. In this regard, there is another proposal, to provide for the creation of a unified state line of textbooks on the national state languages of the republics of the Russian Federation and the languages of the peoples of Russia. This will make it possible, among other things, to systematize programs for the study of people's languages, including within the framework of a multilingual model of education, and to ensure that they comply with federal state educational standards and programs. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. You're right. The law was adopted in 1991, and network amendments were made only in 1998. And at present, the law contains disparate concepts and provisions. It really catches the eye. This provision, along with some other later adopted laws of the Russian Federation and the official register of people's languages, practically does not exist. Therefore, this is a very urgent task. We must definitely work on this. Ira Alexandrovna, please, do you have any comments on what colleagues have said? Or would someone like to add something else to our discussion today? Dear? Yes, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, thank you very much. If I may, a few of our colleagues are still eager to fight. They asked and prepared a speech on important and very diverse topics. May I give the floor? Yes, please. Please. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I ask you to be as specific and short as possible. Please, Ekaterina Guseva.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, dear colleagues and friends, I want to raise an acute moral issue, purity of speech, and the fight against profanity. My concern today is connected with the offensive discrediting of the Russian language with profanity. What used to be a shame has become possible, has become fashionable, and is becoming an integral part of the Russian language. Today, swear words are firmly included in everyday life, speech, and cynically claim to be the role of the Russian cultural tradition. If earlier men tried not to express themselves in front of ladies and kept their strong words, protecting women's ears from this dirt, today it is often possible to hear as yes. We do not hesitate to try to outdo men in the ability to express ourselves with a black word. Citizens do not hesitate to use obscenities on the street, in public places. Even school children communicate through profanity. Personally, I constantly hear this speech in a social environment. You see, words hurt and humiliate me as an Orthodox person, as just a woman, as a mother, and they insult my mother, my motherland, because the word mom is sacred. Today, I hear linguistic promiscuity among seemingly educated and cultured people. This verbal disease affects many teenagers, our younger generation. Even children use swear words, often without understanding their meaning. For some, these words have become a symbol of masculinity, adulthood, and someone just uses them as introductory constructions, or repeats them after adults who talk like that. On the internet today, you can find a monstrous trend: videos where children of 3 to 5 years old swear, and their parents shoot them on the phone and laugh themselves. Then, they post these videos on social networks. The so-called Batwood Challenge. Matt willingly uses popular bloggers, winning the audience with this language pseudo-freedom. It is obvious that anonymous communication on social networks has no moral restrictions. This cannot but affect our children. Russian, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. Among the tasks of state policy, to preserve and strengthen traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, which are defined by your decree number 809 of November 9th, 2022 year. There are also the following: protection and support of the Russian language as the language of the state-forming people, ensuring compliance with the norms of the modern Russian literary language, including the prevention of the use of obscene language. To date, all the necessary legislative decisions have been taken, measures of influence have been determined. But with the help of these prohibitions and fines alone, it is impossible to solve the problems associated with the use of a MAT in interpersonal everyday communication, especially among children. We must protect our young generation from this verbal dirt. To explain to children, using the sensible dictionary of the living great Russian language of Vladimir Dal, who writes, "Mat is foul language, and bad is an abomination, filth, vile filth. Everything is disgusting and disgusting, obscene, that is disgusting carnally and spiritually, uncleanness, filth, rot, corruption, carrion, eruption of coals, gates, stench, obscenity, debauchery, moral corruption. Everything is contrary to God, the opposite of prayer, and the mate is the anti-letter." Dear friends, we need to improve the culture of speech and the moral immunity of our children. This is vital for the future of our country. Russian must be sown, a great, powerful, truthful, free Russian language, and uproot the weeds. It is necessary to conduct explanatory conversations with children, paying attention to the inadmissibility of using obscene words in speech. To stop swearing, you need to stop hearing this mat on film platforms. In various shows from the mouths of popular bloggers, we hear a stammered version of the mat. This is unacceptable. It is necessary that it is not used in public space in any way, even in a hidden form. The process of involving and immersing a person in the world of the Russian language should begin in preschool institutions, continuing in schools and universities, conducting all kinds of exciting interactive language games, quests. It is advisable, as you said, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, to attract professional masters of artistic speech, readers with a variety of poetic, prose reading programs to educational institutions, conduct classes in artistic reading. Then from the classrooms they can be reformatted into competitions of the Festival of Readers of the city, regional and all-Russian scale. Thank you.
Ekaterina Konstantinovna, you have raised, of course, an important question. Profanity, the so-called profanity. Mat is, unfortunately, it is also part of our language. There's no getting away from it. Also, physical culture is the culture of the body. But you're right. We don't develop every time to demonstrate our capabilities and our achievements in this regard. There are certain things related to the general culture of a person. And in speech, in language, it also manifests itself in a very vivid way. You said that Mat is an antimaliva. Well, yes, I understand that this church is treated as a sin. Whoever of you is without sin, as you know, remember, he will be the first to throw a stone at her. So, unfortunately, this is really such a common sin, and, by raising the general culture, it is necessary, of course, to raise the culture of language, the culture of speech. This is such a delicate sphere, and in order to influence this, we need to work in many areas, raising the general culture, showing that in order to express our point of view, to defend it, to show that this is not just an educated person. but a person with firm beliefs and a person who can fight for these beliefs firmly state a position.
Показать, что это человек не просто образованный, а имеющий твердые убеждения и человек, который может побороться за эти убеждения, твердо заявить позицию.
There are other means of expression for this, not just non-normative vocabulary. That's right. I think that, of course, we should work together in this direction. Please. Elena Alexandrovna. Thank you very much. Please, Komarskaya Iskra Videoconference.
Good afternoon, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. Dear colleagues, there are a lot of aspects. We understand that the work on the implementation of the program is very large. I want to raise one more question. From my point of view, the most important one. This is a school program in the Russian language. Today, the most important thing is the school course in the Russian language. And before I move on to the program itself, I would like to make two preliminary remarks about the key elements of my speech. The first is the Russian language and the second is our children, that is, school children. What is happening with the Russian language? I am listening attentively to Ekaterina Konstantinovna. I very much share her concern. Russian. But we must understand that the talk about the degradation of the Russian language, the talk about the corruption of the Russian language, they generally do not correspond to objective reality. I must tell you that as a specialist, I must say that nothing terrible happens with the Russian language. There are issues related to the culture of speech, but do not confuse speech language. Here we are more interested in the language. So with the Russian language as a system, as a national treasure, a treasure, I say with all responsibility, nothing terrible happens. The language of the mirror, it changes, it corresponds to our time. It does not deteriorate, it does not improve, it changes, it lives our life with you, it reflects us and our life. Let me not prove this argument, because in this case, in general, the opinion of specialists is important. I think that for any linguist, for any Russian, this idea is obvious. The second component is children. Our children, Generation Alpha, Generation Z, there will be some more generations soon. In principle, I think this is a good generation. In any case, they are no worse than the previous ones. I have been working at the university for many years. I see a changing generation. This is a completely normal generation, but they are different. They were born in the era of the internet. They were born in the era of numbers and the coming artificial intelligence. Scientists all over the world have already proved, this is already a commonplace, that the results of such technological changes cannot but bring about changes. Therefore, the children, of course, were the first to feel it for themselves. Their cognitive and emotional volitional characteristics have changed. This is, in principle, well, figuratively speaking, a new breed of people. These are not analog people. These are digital people. Russian is definitely something to keep in mind when we talk about the school curriculum, about the Russian language, about teaching the Russian language, and so on. In general, I must say that everything that we have in education happens so quickly, so rapidly in the 21st century. It is still designed for an analog person, and not for a digital person. It seems that we need to quickly fix the situation and catch up. In general, the school curriculum in the Russian language is a subject of long-standing disputes. We, the Rusists, we have long expressed concern with what and how he wants at school. We are aware that the school curriculum cannot reflect the current state of science. But such a gap is unacceptable. There is such a gap between modern ideas about the language, between the current state of the Russian language and its school version. Long-term training in grammar rules has not led to literate speech. Long-term training in spelling and punctuation rules does not lead to literate writing. What follows from this? Because of this, there is a need to change the school curriculum. First, the first question that will arise is this concept. What kind of concept? What provisions? What postulates could form the basis of a new concept? It seems that these postulates are as follows. Language is a living organism. The language norm is not a sentence. Children do not spoil the language. They are equal bearers of it and even creators. At the same time, and in a cross-cutting way, the thought and thesis, postulate, language should be carried out, the main guardian of culture, and requires a responsible and careful attitude. The goals of the school curriculum should be achievable. They should be specific. This will help to achieve good results. The goals should be as follows. They are large. They are very voluminous. But there are two of them. To be able to read and understand the texts of their epoch and previous eras that are important for culture. To be able to create understandable texts in compliance with the language, communicative and ethical norms accepted in society. This will be followed, of course, by an educational program. The educational program should take into account the changed cognitive characteristics of new generations and their technological capabilities, peculiarities of thinking, easy and constant access to information, increased trust in the Internet, a tendency not to assimilate knowledge, but to rent knowledge. If we want to achieve some very serious results, we need to keep all this in mind. It is necessary to revise the amount of knowledge and revise the wording in textbooks. Colleagues have already talked about this. It has become a commonplace and a serious obstacle in school education. Children do not understand what is written in the textbook. This is a very serious problem, very. And yet, I will try to break the rules. And one more thought that needs to be expressed. In our school, there is a subject called native language. Russian is not a native language, we have just heard, and it is important that people who do not have Russian as a native language can learn Russian as a state language and as a native language. But for children for whom Russian is their native language, the presence of this subject seems very strange. Very strange. Therefore, it is necessary. There is a juxtaposition of want or don't want. It is clear that it was not laid. It is clear that it was not intentional. It is clear that it was not consciously. But it somehow turned out by itself. Russian certainly needs to be reviewed in the state and exclude this undesirable opposition of Russian and native Russian that has arisen. Thank you.
It's so complicated you finished. Could you explain again?
Please. The school has a native language subject.
Yes.
But if a child studies in Tatarstan, it's good. He has Russian and has a native language. Yes, Russian is a native language for a child. He has two subjects, the Russian language and then the native language. What kind of native is this?
At the very beginning, it was said that Russian should be native to all people who live in the Russian Federation. I'm not saying it has to be that way. Colleagues were just talking about it here. Bearing in mind that this is the language of intraethnic communication, the state-forming language. It is necessary to deal with this, of course, so that there is a so-called legal technique, so that the concepts are equally understood by everyone, and there is no confusion. There would be no confusion. I agree. Okay, thanks a lot. As for the fact that nothing terrible happens to the Russian language, of course, it is a living organism. And it develops as life goes forward. New concepts appear that could not be formulated in any way before, because they simply did not exist in our life, in science, in technology. They appear new things, they are somehow designated, and the fact that they appeared somewhere in other countries initially, and the corresponding language images were created. Therefore, everything is implemented in this way. In my opinion, There is nothing terrible here either, I agree with you. As for profanity, I have already spoken about it. He would like to add this. If I cannot disagree with Ekaterina Konstantinovna. After all, when our representatives of the so-called elites of the most diverse, they often use a strong word. I believe that they do this primarily in order to show, excuse me, their coolness and show their closeness to the people. But in Russia, the common people did not use strong words in particular. I can tell from my family. I have never heard anything like this from my father, especially from my mother. Never at all. And I know that my grandparents on both sides, both maternal and paternal, behaved the same way. Why? Russians were all very religious, Orthodox people, and for them it is a sin. I remind you that at the end of the week, everyone went to confession, and the priests reported what they had done, how they had sinned. And this has disciplined people in a certain way. Therefore, everything is good here. I'm not going to go into discussions now, let alone argue with experts, and I'm not going to enter into an argument. But I just pay attention to it. Please, let's move on. Elena Alexandrovna. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Please, Stepashin Sergei Vladimirovich. Good afternoon, Vladimir Vladimirovich. I am acting as the president of the Russian Book Union, just in case. I'll start with a pleasant one. Thank you very much for last year, we allocated 900 billion from our reserve. Despite the fact that there is a war with bandits and the West, we bought and published, more precisely, published and sent books to our return to the state for free. 3 million books, 2,500 libraries. We have already heard about this today. The books are wonderful, wonderful, published. And you know, Vladimirovich, the most amazing thing is that they all arrived. We sent Furits from Moscow, and not a single bandit this very flying thing flew. All the books have reached and distributed. Thank you very much. We will continue this line of work. Moreover, we have connected leaders. This is an opportunity to receive information for free books in a technical version. And we will continue this line, and the Russian Book Union will continue to work here. But I have a request right away. We really have, Olga Borisovna, probably Sergei Sergeyevich, you will agree. The topic of completing school libraries is extremely complex. Many libraries have not been updated since the 90s. Can you imagine, right? And the school library today is sometimes the only opportunity to read a book because the book is expensive. Let's open up frankly. They are wonderful and beautiful, but expensive. In this regard, please. The Russian Book Union is ready to get involved in this work and prepare its proposals, but I would like you to educate the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Culture, and the Russian Book Union, so that we prepare a special program for updating the library fund. Moreover, in your speech, I noticed that you paid a lot of attention to school libraries. Remember, we had very good school libraries in Leningrad. We studied together, it was at the same time. Second, we've had a great book festival. Thank you for the Red Square. With difficulty, but you gave the go-ahead. And then the book festival went to our native St. Petersburg. The fourth one will be on the Palace Square today. It is now going on, a book festival with a broad step, if I may say so, in Astrakhan, in Arkhangelsk, in Vladivostok, in Samara, in Saratov, and in Bashkortostan. Bashkortostan has become the most reading region this year. Why am I saying all this now? There would be an appeal to you from the Russian Book Council, from me, if possible, to instruct our governors that such book festivals have been held in all regions. Moreover, look, next year we have 80 years of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War. Let's hold it not only on Krasny Dvortsovaya, but in all regions of the country. We will hold it both in Lugansk and in Donetsk, I hope, and in Kherson. Maybe it will work out already. That's the last thing I want to say. Well, first of all, I want to thank Sergei Kirienko and Sergei Novikov, who are present here. They supported the initiative of the Russian Writers' Union, the Russian Book Union. We have a new one. I'm sorry, but yes, a book award. It is called The Word. It is becoming the first state prize today, because all the other book awards, be it a big book, Lyceum, Rasputin Prize, Fedor Abramev, They are at the expense of spawn funds. There is serious support for your administration here. And probably this is correct. This will be the first state prize for our writers. And we agreed on the direction of this award all together. Elena knows, we have already held a meeting. I'm talking about the Impolskaya. It will be a patriotic book, a book about our land, about our sufferings, including in our liberated territories. So thank you very much. And you know, so personally, the war seems to be going on. There are so many problems in the country. We understand perfectly well. And you are holding such a meeting. Keep it up. Thank you. Thank you. Sergei Vladimirovich, we are holding such a meeting because we are fighting on the line of contact for the preservation of our radiation values, the Russian language. That's why it's the basis, it's the most important element of our identity. Therefore, there is nothing surprising here. Thank you for your offer. I will ask Sergei Vladimirovich and his colleagues in the regions to also talk about this and support the proposal to hold book fairs. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Colleagues, I have a request, a suggestion to optimize a little, right? Here is the topic of school libraries with Sergei Vadimovich was touched upon. We have two members of the council offered to speak on this topic. Let me ask Maxim Alexeyevich Drevel. Are there any concrete proposals for school libraries to close this topic? Yes. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I will continue the topic of libraries. In your speech, you rightly noted the importance of developing libraries at all levels. And in general, we have paid attention many times before to how key and important a role libraries play in the upbringing and development of the younger generation. We have seen in recent years the successful experience of transforming public libraries, how they have turned. Many of them have turned from places where you can get a book, full-fledged educational centers, cultural centers where knowledge can be obtained in a modern, fascinating form. And such a transformation, of course, has affected school libraries to a much lesser extent. And the first library that the student interacts with does not allow him to understand how interesting this space can be. And he does not see the place where lectures, film screenings, poetry readings, intellectual games take place. And we understand how important this task is. In this regard, I have 4 proposals and initiatives that can help solve it. The first, of course, is connected with the development of new skills and competencies by librarians, which will allow them to conduct various educational activities. To do this, you will need to launch a federal training program. And here social studies is ready to provide comprehensive support. For example, the Mashik Knowledge Center has trained about 30,000 people in 2 years. We say that Mashik teaches those who teach. And we are ready to launch a separate referral program for school librarians. The second initiative is a competition aimed at identifying the best initiatives and projects among school libraries. It would be great if they, the finalists, could apply for grant support to implement the best library projects in the country. And the final of such a competition could be an annual forum where librarians from all over the country would meet, share best practices and experience. Maybe even the federal territory of Sirius, where the best methods of working with school children are already concentrated, can become the place of such a forum. Well, and the last initiative. I want to recall the project One Toy, which Irina Alexandrovna spoke about. And if we talk about such a full-fledged library space that goes far beyond books, then it would be great, in my opinion, to fill it with domestic games, board games, educational games, constructors, which, according to the logic of the competition, will be based on our history, culture, values, heroes, exploits. And just by the beginning of the next academic year, we expect that the competition will allow us to determine the finalists and launch a number of domestic games and toys into production. Thank you very much. Yes, I think everything is interesting. We need to try to implement all your suggestions. Federal training programs and guarantee support, librarians, toys, everything is interesting. Well, we will definitely work it out with you. Thank you. Please. What else? Thank you very much. Please, if you can, here is literally Oleg Igorovich Yankovsky. We are, so to speak. Yes, we are going to the code. Yes. Hello, colleagues. Vladimir Vladimirovich. Last year, I became the Teacher of the Year of Russia, being a teacher of Russian literature at the school at the Russian Embassy in Iran. And I consider this work experience to be unique. I would like to announce the results of this work and share my experience. A very significant case. 2023 year, I have a class under the classroom guidance of 6 people. And all 6 are different nationalities. They are Russian, Armenian, Tajik, Kyrgyz, Astrakhan Naga, and Turkmen. And seeing this national diversity, I suggested that the guys hold a game called In the Native Land. Each of them could tell about his country, dedicate to the games of his people, offer national treats. The guys felt very proud, but I think I felt even more proud because this whole kaleidoscope of culture unfolded on the basis of our Russian school, as it happened in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union. And in this sense, other peoples and cultures reciprocate with us. There is an interest in the Russian language, I can say this unequivocally. I talked with colleagues from other embassy schools. And we are talking now not only about the CIS countries, but also Germany. Hungary is interested. In particular, Iran, which recently became a member of the BRICS, is also showing this interest. What does it look like? For example, a third of the students of the embassy school are foreign citizens, again, not only from CIS countries. Moreover, we have received dozens of applications from ethnic Iranians to have their children learn Russian. And the school at the Russian embassy in Iran at the moment does not have the opportunity to accept new foreigners and teach the language. Just the power does not allow. The International Book Exhibition, which is held annually in Tehran, usually attracts all attention to the Russian stand. Because there are novelties of children's literature and other currently relevant book component that Iranians are very interested in. Teachers of the Russian language constantly come there. It is very interesting for them. Also, in every bookstore I visited in the city of Tehran, I saw translations of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in Farsi. In other words, there is interest, it is stable. And I think it's important to take advantage of this. Of course, I understand that the growth of cooperation, the Ministry of Culture are working on these issues. Russian culture centers, but in November last year, Nikolai Maximovich Siskoridze started talking about what proposals he had made on how to improve the activities of Russian houses and centers of Russian culture. But in Tehran in particular, the Russian house does not work at all, because the Iranian side has not ratified the necessary documents. In addition, it seems to me that it would be possible to pay attention not only to the adult audience, but as a teacher, to children first of all. Because children, with their pure, unclouded, no influence from non-views, not subject to propaganda, will understand with their own eyes, they are closest to the truth, how great the mighty Russian language is, how extensive our culture is, how strong it is, and will be able to use this advantage both in their favor and in our favor. In what way? I have a couple of examples. This is a 21st year graduate, Diana Tahiri. She graduated from our embassy school after studying with her for 11 years. Her father was educated in the Soviet Union. She wanted the same for her daughter. Russian was passed by the girl by 90 points, perfectly understood Russian classical literature. Now she is studying on a budget at the Moscow State Law Academy and is listed as one of the best students. The second example is Uzbek Delarum Yuldashaliva. In the 22nd year, she graduated, passed the Russian language for 96 points, entered the Rudin on a budget. Russian students did not believe that her native language was not Russian. Russian language test, she coped with better even than some of her Russian classmates. In this regard, I see the prospect of holding days of Slavic writing, thematic literary balls, and other events by embassy schools, which would popularize the Russian language and culture among, let's say, the children's population. Then in a few years, we will literally get a generation of people who have deep respect for our country on an organic level. This is at least, and as a maximum, they will receive education from us and will benefit our state already. Next year, I plan to continue my business trips abroad in embassy schools. Therefore, if the Council formulates instructions for me, I am ready to fulfill them, and I consider it an honor. Well, I want to conclude my speech with a quote from Vladimir Mayakovsky, who is an African of advanced years, said that I would have learned Russian only because Lenin spoke to him. Russians are taught by modern Tajiks, Kyrgyz, Turkmens, and many other nationalities, because great Russian writers, composers, and artists thought and created on it. Thank you for your attention. Yes, thank you very much, Oleg Yurievich. You know, I have already said publicly many times, well, actually, this is such a commonplace if we are talking about the economy, about currencies. Interest in certain currencies in the world, it depends on the size of the economy of the issuing country, because it can be used, bearing in mind the expanding economic ties with this state. The same thing happens, and interest in the language of a particular country grows with the growth of the authority of a particular country, its role and importance in world affairs. Russia is currently strengthening its position. This is a very obvious thing. And, of course, there is a growing interest in the Russian language. But it is a natural thing to do, to carry out appropriate work on the basis of our embassies, on the basis of schools attached to embassies. Of course, we support this. And I want to repeat once again, of course, the most important thing is to strengthen our country's position in the world. If you have already remembered about Mayakovsky, then probably you can remember something else. Look, Envy, I am a citizen of the Soviet Union when you wrote, we all need to be proud that we are citizens of the Russian Federation. And this pride for the country, for its achievement, will certainly be transmitted further to all those who want to cooperate with us. That is a good idea. Let's implement it. Thank you. Elena Alexandrovna, everything or something else? Do you have any other suggestions and questions? Vladimir Vladimirovich, as you say. In general, two speakers would still like to, if possible. Colleagues, please. Sergei Vitalyevich Bezrukov, Vladislav Valeryevich Malenko. Straight in a row, yes, if you can, briefly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. I am dreaming about what has already been said about Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. While freedom, we burn, while hearts are alive for honor, my friend of the fatherland, we dedicate our souls to beautiful impulses. Into the heart? Very accurate. There were a lot of projects and appeals of the poet's creativity in the Jubilee year. I would like to mention one project for preschoolers. A cartoon project called Pushkin and Mikhailovskaya. Given the modern aesthetics, the equipment of today's child with different gadgets. The project prepares children for the perception of poetry, that is, for the highest language form. And I checked on my children. I really liked it. And everyone liked it. A wonderful story. It's just that the solution itself is very good, interesting, and very much develops and pushes us to study, again, our very Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. If we talk about poetry as an instrument of popularization of the native language, I would like to remind you that next year is 130 years since the birth of Sergei Alexandrovich Yesenin. If the Holy Army shouts, Kinter, guns are in paradise, I will say, don't need paradise, give me my homeland. The poet, who I do not know, just on a biological level, confessed his love for the motherland, for Russia. Therefore, I consider it expedient to hold this Yesenin year in different directions, in all regions of the country. Starting from the very first stage, from school, for example, to hold contests for the best reading of the poet's poems. And ending with the most powerful, we always have powerful concerts in the Kremlin. But nevertheless, a powerful performance in the Kremlin Palace with the participation of our popular pop stars. It is dedicated to poetry and romances, of which there are a huge number of truly folk songs. Based on the poems of Sergei Yesenin, I support the initiative of general knowledge about the revival of the Institute of Cheating programs. I work in this myself, I think a lot, I speak a lot, and I understand how people hear. And I see how it reacts to the poetry of the viewer. And in fact, you can read, and do not use large decorations. You just go out and work. The most important thing, probably, is to do it behind your back, really professionally. As for the promotion of the Russian language abroad, recently the Moscow Provincial Theater was on tour in Tashkent. We showed Chekhov, Uncle Vanya, and The Little Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, 2 performances. We were worried because the performances were without translation in Russian, but the audience took it perfectly. It was sold out. The only time we were worried was when we played The Little Prince. I read The Little Prince in Russian. That is, the adults understood. The children were also delighted, probably because the adults translated everything for them. Because, as for children, not everyone knows Russian anymore. Before leaving, I literally had a big conversation at the Ministry of Culture of Uzbekistan. And we signed a program on cooperation of our theater with the leading theaters of the Republic. In addition, I told about the Big Children's Festival, which we have been curating for 7 years. Under the patronage of our theater, 7 years in a row. This is a multi-genre program: theater, cinema, animation, a book, a modern book for children. So, I told you about this program. Moreover, I told about the echo of the Big Children's Festival, because all the winners of the Big Children's Festival, we then echo with such a kind of echo, and bring them to various distant regions of our country. We drove from Kaliningrad to Kamchatka. We are going to Kamchatka for the second time. We were in Arkhangelsk for the second time. This is a holiday week for children, I note in Russian, although there is also a national language nomination. In other words, we received a wonderful performance in the Buryat language. Why watched ours? Russian viewers, children, families watched. They took a very good performance about my grandmother, very touching to tears. So, talking with the Ministry of Culture of Uzbekistan, they were very interested in the echo of the Big Children's Festival. And I had an idea to expand the range of our echo a little bit, so that it would also roll through our former Soviet republics. Because there is a need for Russian there. I talked here literally before leaving, in a wonderful family. Such an intelligent family, Uzbeks. How did they speak Russian? Just envy, because it's with such a culture of speech, and with such a kind of such longing for the Soviet Union. Yes, 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 but this is an adult generation. Of course, the children already speak more English, which was not very pleasant, I can honestly say. I confess. I didn't hide it. Russian is what they are drawn to, however, and they want to listen to both performances in Russian and a film in Russian. I think that this is the echo of a big children's festival. I would extend not only Uzbekistan there, but there are Union republics even further away. And such a big program is a week-long holiday for children in Russian. Animation, cinema, it's all in Russian. It would, I think, be very strategically correct. And that's all, actually. Sorry, emotionally. I'm a practitioner, so I'm used to reading from the stage and acting in movies. I'm with you. Yes, I totally agree with you. I very often communicate with my colleagues in all the republics of the former Soviet Union, including Uzbekistan. I see, of course. A lot has been lost there in previous years. But I see the desire of the leadership of these countries, including Uzbekistan, and people in these countries, including Uzbekistan. I see a desire to get to know Russia, the Russian language better. And, paraphrasing Yesenin, whom you remembered, we can safely say that a lot of people there will say, I am not such a bitter drunkard, so that, without seeing Moscow, I die. Russian language and culture should therefore be supported by this desire to help people and help us. By helping these countries to learn the Russian language and Russian culture, to help create conditions for this study. Well, the proposal for the year of Yesenin is a very good proposal. I will definitely ask the government and the administration to work out and support. Thank you very much. Thank you. If I may, the final performance from those who recorded, it is Vladislav Valery Malenko. May I? Yes, of course. Thank you very much, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich. Dear colleagues, comrades, I would like to reflect very briefly, to consult with you about the education of a new galaxy of Russian writers, young poets. Not just about discovering new names, but about delicate, careful, at the same time very exciting work with the guys. About accompanying their talents, about creating assembly centers in the country, if I may say so, of meanings, which affect an entire generation now and then. Russian literature, in particular poetry, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Speaking about the power and significance of Russian literature, you have repeatedly recalled one of the most brilliant. I will recall one more Russian poet, Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov. These thoughts of yours are very close to me. You said that this genius was a difficult boy. Complicated. Absolutely. With an unkempt character, partly opposed to the authorities. But his search for justice, his work with language, was accompanied by the most important thing that, probably, A Russian person of different nationalities has, as I say. This is the main thing. This is an inescapable love for your country, for the motherland. And in foreign times, these guys, maybe not quite who were comfortable in peacetime, were bristly, prickly. They get up and go to defend their country. And why is this happening? Because, well, apparently, at one time in the family, at school, they carried out the most important, patient, very unhurried work with their creative apparatus, with their vulnerable, talented soul. And today, there is a complete readiness, through the translation of new meanings through literature, which plays a key role in the cultural and social code to instill in a new generation of brilliant, in my opinion, young authors. A picture of the world in which an individualist, a creator, does not oppose himself to the interests of his country, but works, on the contrary, for creation without the slightest, of course, rejection of one's own opinion. And we are already implementing this mission, without any guidance from above, because we realize the critical importance of educating a new generation that will act and shine during the 30s and 40s of the 21st century. And in this regard, I will once again recall Lermontov. Akhmetova considered his fate fatal, prophetic for Russia, focusing on what events respond to the same dates of his short life. The 14th year, 41st year. Imagine how amazing. Vladimir Vladimirovich, dear friends, there is a specific offer, because the creative team, which I have been leading for many years, is engaged in this kind of thing, of educating young authors. The very basics. We would like to propose to create a creative bureau of young writers in the structure of the Union of Writers of Russia. The task of such a network bureau will be to coordinate all project activities in the field of young literature, especially in the regions. These are festivals, literary publications, seminars, creative workshops, and other, of course, projects that bring, so to speak, to the consumer the fruits of the activities that the guys are engaged in. The flagship project will be the All-Russian Festival of Young Poetry, Filatev Fest, which has already proven itself for 10 years. During this time, 20,000 people took part in it. Vladimir Vladimirovich, you have met with the participants of this festival more than once within the framework of the Tavrida Art Youth Forum. This is a very free festival. Guys, well, how to say it? Trust is such a delicate, fragile thing. And the guys trust us, because any falsehood would have scared them off long ago. The measure is the quality of the text, the way fine work, camaraderie, support. Common interests in work, maybe even outside of some kind of professional boat, yes. And so it is important not just to open them, it is important to accompany them later, on a systematic basis, to improve. That's why we have come up with training courses in the format of workshops, seminars, litmas, to improve the professional level of young authors, their contact with recognized masters of the word. The structure of the work will be carried out through the creation of an ANGO, or an organization with a legal entity, for constant interaction with regional offices in order to actively involve the subjects of Russia in the development of modern young literature. In order to increase coverage, interaction with creative public unions, youth sections, and print publications will be expanded. Our goal is to create a professional community, to form a new generation of young writers, corresponding to the interests of Russia, without restricting freedom of creativity and opinion, as opposed to the so-called cancellation culture used in the West. Russian literature, Russian culture of the 30s and 40s, all these people, all these creators, it seems to me, can become the face of Russian literature, Russian culture of the 30s and 40s. What is the purpose of creativity in general? Well, humanism, right? Human excitement, and especially in foreign times, is to comfort, spiritualize, give people confidence, heal souls, strengthen the national spirit. And you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, talked about this, recently spoke at a cultural forum in St. Petersburg. An example of such a creative wave today can be safely called the heyday of modern poetry. But it is. I have books in my hands, we just bake them, just bake them. You can call it that here, in this library, soldiers of their own, we called it that, and one book fits quietly in a pocket. Here in the pocket of soldiers, in a tunic. There are authors here who have already become the new Tverdovsky, Simonov, Gujenko. Here is present, sitting next to me, my comrade Vonko, the beautiful brilliant poet, Anya Dolgareva. Here Igor Korolev is brilliant, frontline soldier Dima Artis, my students Alexander Antipov, Roman Sorokin. In short, Vladimir Vladimirovich, do the poet's vocation, including calling your time by name, saying what it's called. And I want to finish mine. This is the word and quote part of his poem Assembly, which somehow resonated in people like that. Having studied the century to the crust, they will then say about everyone. They lived during the assembly, saw the change of milestones, the fallen and the living. The darkness will be ground to holes. Russian privates repair the world. A grain grower on cleaning, and a machinist in the arrow. The whole of Russia is being assembled, in the field, in the mountains, in the Kremlin. Russians sleep at the beginning, then drive horses. They dreamed of crushing us, they only made us stronger. Moscow is on the air again, and St. George's Hall. Creation of the world through the Russian portal. Thank you. Thank you very much, Vyso Valerievich. When did you start talking, and began to give characteristics to our today's writers, both talented, and such people with their own opinions? I immediately thought, I give you my word of honor, bristly needles, and suddenly you say these words out loud, once and for all. But it happens. It means that we are on the same wavelength to a certain extent. And, of course, there have always been a lot of such writers in our country, in our history, who are talented, brilliant, and at the same time gentle, ruffled. But these people, why do we respect and love them? Because these people did not think about earning something and somewhere on criticizing their fatherland, but critically assessed everything that was happening in their country in order to make the homeland better. But at the same time, they were ready to fight for it, if necessary, and with weapons in their hands, as Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov did. The offers are wonderful. And so I will also ask the administration, first of all, to think about how to move in all these areas, in order to implement your proposal. Thank you very much. Elena Alexandrovna. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. We are ready to finish. We understand how much time we have already raised. No. We are engaged in a very important matter. One thing is that this direction is one of the most important, so it's not a pity to spend time on it. But I understand, of course, we have a big council, and there are a lot of people in it who probably have a lot of proposals. But we will proceed from the fact that the main ones have been voiced, and in order not to go around in circles anymore, it is really probably possible to stop our discussion. But I very much hope that Elena Alexandrovna is in contact with all the participants of our conversation and meeting today. And if something else has not sounded, then I will ask Elena Alexandrovna to collect it all, to communicate with colleagues in addition. But also firm communication, as far as I imagine, it should take place in such a constant mode. I want to thank you for today's joint work, for your suggestion. We will certainly formalize all this accordingly, and do everything that depends on us, in order to move towards the implementation of everything that was formulated today. Thank you very much, Irina Alexandrovna. Thank you, and all the participants of our meeting today, and our discussion today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimirovich.